Life is strange. I think that probably goes without saying, but I wonder how many people actually take the time to think about that, thinking how we got to where we are now from the young child we used to be, how certain things we used to look at with awe are now met with disinterest, how every interaction of every day shapes us. With this in mind, I'd like to pose a question. If you saw this manga image promoting a series in a bookstore, would you expect everything I just mentioned to be part of the story? I'm guessing most people would highly doubt that, but I'm here to lay those doubts to rest. Not only does it contain those themes, but I would argue that it's a modern masterpiece. Goodnight Punpun, or Oyasumi Punpun if you prefer, is a manga series that is far different than what you might be used to. It has gorgeous art, excellent panel layouts, and a very interesting character-driven narrative. It also contains very heavy themes of depression, suicide, adultery, abuse, apathy, backstabbing, aimlessness, anger, sadness, and a general sense of cynicism throughout. That said, would you judge me if I said it's one of my favorite manga series? Punpun on the whole is a rough ride in the best possible way. It doesn't sugarcoat anything, it doesn't necessarily try to have a message, it's just purely and simply itself. It's a harsh look at reality that doesn't let you avert your eyes, and with a psychological genre tag, you know you'll be in for something special. This isn't immediately apparent though. The story's not action-packed or fast-paced. It's a slow burn that rewards whoever goes on the journey with quite the tale. A dark tale, mind you, but certainly an interesting one. This particular tale happens to fall under the slice of life umbrella. For those unfamiliar, slice of life series usually involve everyday life situations that tend to lean into comedic territory. They're mostly written with the intent of relaxation or enjoyment. Punpun takes this trope and spins it in an entirely different direction. I'm not usually a fan of the synopsis that most translated series use to draw in overseas readers, but I think the one Punpun uses is perfect. A slice of life that slices back. If hearing that doesn't slightly intrigue you, I don't know what will. The general story revolves around Punpun, a small cartoon bird thing. This interesting little guy grows up over the course of the story, from kid all the way to adult, and we're present every step of the way. It's interesting seeing a story progress in this manner because stories in the same vein usually cap off at the end of high school or even college. It's very rare to follow a character so closely for so long. Every thought or desire he has is on full display for us to see, no matter how vulgar or offensive. And honestly, I'm glad it's like that. Punpun actually feels like a real person. As a child, we watch him have dreams, questions, and interactions with others. He grows up taking in tons about the world around him. He talks to God and always gets incredible advice. His innocence propels him forward into any situation unflinchingly. Whatever happens, everything will work out. There's a problem with this though. As most of us come to realize growing up, not everything is presented in a good or clean manner. Not everything can remain as it once was. And not everything can remain innocent. As Punpun continues through his life, a number of things begin to happen. The home life he was used to previously is forever changed. The God he was used to talking to now only offers him criticism and useless advice. He goes through a certain childhood trauma that forever shapes the person that he'll be in life. Punpun continues to grow and does what he can, but the older he gets, the more he starts to lose. He becomes haunted by his failures. He's not only frustrated that life is unfair and cruel, but hates how simple it is. He can't relate to the people around him. His job is unfulfilling. He begins to shut the world out. He lays in bed, unable to function. This leads him down a progressively darker path, and this path changes him in a way you might not expect. From the start, we see Punpun as he is, a small cartoon bird of sorts. The thing is, he's not actually a cartoon bird. Punpun is perceived in this way for some reason, and he views his family in a similar fashion. The reason for this could be a number of things. A mind unable to recall how his family looked previously, caricatures used for the sake of simplicity, maybe even symbolism meant to represent how Punpun sees the world around him. But whatever the case, Punpun is a regular person like you and me. Throughout the narrative, we only see Punpun how he sees himself. For a long time, he remains his cartoon bird self. However, we gradually begin to witness changes taking place. As Punpun gets older, he gets more cynical, directly reflecting on his appearance. He becomes darker in nature, drawn with thicker outlines. He goes from one instance of himself to the next, constantly morphing and changing with new experiences. His former innocence gets stretched and beaten into submission. After he hits a certain breaking point, he simply withdraws into himself and becomes a triangle. It's always fascinating to me watching these transformations occur and wondering what will come next. Possibly the more unsettling forms occur much later on, where we see Punpun almost drawn completely human. Something that would ordinarily be deemed normal elicits a very different reaction after witnessing the previous events. Not to mention, there's still a piece of himself shrouded with mystery in this form. It's borderline genius how these visuals so effortlessly convey emotion. From joy to sarcasm to absolute disgust, it's always written on his cartoon face. We can only guess what the true meaning of the expressions are, as Punpun still remains a bit hard to read beneath the surface. This aspect of Punpun gets paired with another interesting trait. His dialogue only ever shows up in dark panels. While every other character communicates through typical word bubbles, Punpun's dialogue is shown in a completely detached manner. We never see him directly talk to anyone. This adds more to the already present sense of disconnect, and despite my earlier statement, it almost makes Punpun not feel real. He's a foreign object that doesn't quite fit within his own story. Then again, that's kind of the point. Punpun never feels right with himself. He can't pin things down, he can't make up his mind, he doesn't know why he is the way he is. This constant sense of conflict, whether real or not, makes him feel incredibly human. So many characters and so many stories try and act real, but Punpun with his struggles almost makes it effortless. Amazingly enough, he's not the only character with this level of depth. While plenty of characters do well enough as side pieces, there's a remarkable amount of other characters that get lots of development. Hell, one character from Punpun's childhood doesn't get seen again until the final chapter, and he still manages to be memorable. That's some solid writing right there. For better or worse, most of these characters deal with lots of hardship. Some also inflict these hardships onto other characters. It becomes quite the web, let me tell you. To give an example, Satie, for instance, is a childhood friend of Punpun's. He doesn't care about much of anything, but he's also incredibly smart. He's completely uninvolved in his life, doesn't have any real direction, and mostly just goes to work for the sake of passing the time. He's never been able to completely understand his other childhood friend, who has seemingly odd delusions. The world, while being a fascinating place at times, only really elicits dull feelings from Satie. His nihilistic attitude constantly holds him back. The thing he truly wants the most is an escape. Another noteworthy person is Punpun's uncle, who seems somewhat reliable despite not having a job. His morals and beliefs are very grounded, and he's willing to help in a pinch. Looking at him from all angles, you wouldn't think there's anything worth worrying about. Following him around, however, reveals a different story. Succumbing to dark passions and self-serving actions, he falls further and further into despair. He can't seem to escape his cycle of loathing and self-hatred. He attempts to work past his demons, but more failed attempts begin to lead towards a dead end. As Punpun grows up with his uncle, their paths cross in very unexpected ways, and his advice sticks with Punpun for the rest of his life. There's also the background presence of an odd man that can supposedly see the future. The world is doomed, but if he can manage to gather together a group of special individuals, it might yet be saved. While these intentions claim to be noble, they have a seemingly darker undertone, and this collective group of his starts to look more and more like a cult. This is just a taste of some of the additional characters in this story. They never feel like they're detracting from anything. Rather, they only serve to deepen the themes of the story. Punpun is a person living his life. Likewise, the other individuals are doing the same. Everyone goes about their business and does their best to get by. Some characters interact with each other, and some stay completely independent of everything else that's going on. Some are angry, some are content, some aren't sure how they feel. I like to think that the overall narrative drives a certain point home. No matter what happens, life continues on. It's uncaring, uninvolved, and impartial to whatever your circumstances might be. Everyone has their own specific situations and issues to deal with. We only have the choice to move forward, wherever life takes us. Sometimes it takes us on a journey. Sometimes it takes us to the abyss. And sometimes it takes us to good vibrations. All of these themes and characters are presented with gorgeous artistic skill. With plenty of art styles seemingly borrowing from similar looks, it's very refreshing seeing a series present itself with rich original detail. Granted, I understand just how intensive the work schedules are for manga artists, and I don't want to knock on any particular art style, but when something so nice looking manages to come out despite the workload, it makes me want to fully acknowledge it. This style is all its own, and if I saw a character out of context, I would definitely know who it came from. Background spreads are equally great to look at too. Places like schools and apartments are chock full of detail, and shots of nature feel vast and stretch across the panels. There's a scene I especially remember during a meeting between an artist and their editor. The entire discussion takes place in a single location, and it might not catch the eyes of a lot of readers, but rather than using only basic angles for talking, the scene shifts to various places, including underneath the table. I don't think I've ever seen shots like that in a series, and they add a lot of character. It almost feels like eavesdropping, making the conversation a little more awkward to read through. With all these great panels, you might find yourself pausing more just to check out the drawings. I mean, who could blame you? To wrap things up here, I'd like to reintroduce the manga image I brought up during the intro. You might notice that another character is here with Punpun. Before, I mentioned briefly that Punpun experienced a certain trauma when he was younger. This trauma involves the girl here, and as things turn out, the bond they share is the connecting thread of the main story. What I want to talk about is the relationship between Punpun and a girl named Aiko. The spoilers here will be a bit more focused, so if you'd like to skip past them, please go to the time shown on the screen. After falling in love with Aiko at first sight in class, the two of them get close, and later promise to go to another city together. Due to family circumstances, Punpun was forced to break this promise on their meetup day. This resulted in Aiko deserting him, and he was racked with guilt for years. After a chance encounter in high school, Punpun has the chance to make amends, but only if he betrays another classmate. Despite wanting to, he can't bring himself to do it, and leaves Aiko alone for possibly the last time. This decision torments Punpun during his time as an adult, and his life was never the same after that encounter. The only thing that starts to matter to him is finding Aiko again, which only makes things worse. He continues to spiral further and further down, until he meets some new friends that gradually help him to ascend again. It's during this part of his life that he runs into a familiar face, and it just so happens to be Aiko. At first, they put up a front, but eventually drop the act, and both admit they had been wanting to find each other again. Both of them are equally empty inside, and understand just how similar they are. Tired of the everyday monotony. Tired of being tied to pain that never seems to stop. Plain and simply, tired. They make the decision to run away together and start a new life. Before heading out, they stop by Aiko's home to tell her cult-obsessed mother that she'll no longer be there. After the dialogue inevitably breaks down, the new lovers decide it would be best to leave. Aiko's mother refuses to stand for her daughter leaving her control, and secretly pulls out a knife. She makes a mad dash for Aiko in a fit of rage, and Punpun witnesses this crazy act as it's happening. He has seconds to make a decision. He pulls Aiko out of the way, getting pinned against the wall with a blade that only nearly misses. She pulls back and begins to assault Aiko. With the tension spiraling out of control, Punpun's composure cracks. The seams begin to pull apart. The god he shunned many years ago reappears as an interested spectator. With one last phrase, everything finally snaps. I won't say anything more to spoil the rest of that. However, there's a couple additional details worth mentioning that I really love. The final part of Punpun's journey has a lot of interesting character moments. One of these involves a darker thought being emphasized with a series of repeating panels. There isn't anything worth noting here until you notice a very subtle difference in another panel, which quickly goes away by the next. One darker moment of violence draws a parallel to Aiko's childhood, specifically a missing tooth. Lastly, one of the more haunting chapters takes place on a nice-looking beach. The two lovers are having fun, and everything is picture perfect, until we see this. This moment, whether you have context or not, has some real impact, and it definitely caught me off guard. So there you have it, a brief glimpse into the world of Punpun. Honestly, I love this story a lot. There are various things I can relate to, sometimes even drawing parallels with certain character experiences. The series itself is referred to as an utsumanga, or depressing manga. The author, Inio Asano, isn't the biggest fan of this term, but I don't really think the term itself is negative. I actually came across this series at a time in my life when I was very depressed, but rather than it being a bad experience, I appreciated what it had to say. I've never been a fan of things that try to hide the bad or avoid talking about it. Punpun doesn't bullshit the reader, and I'll forever be grateful for that. An art piece that gives the feeling of being depressing for some might give others the feeling of being more grounded. In a sense, it's even comforting. That might sound strange, but that's just how I see it. Regardless, you can come away from this manga with a variety of things, but this is what I personally take from it. Life is made up of choices, and sometimes those choices don't lead to where you'd expect, regardless of how you want them to go. The greater the expectations you place on something, the higher the chance it'll let you down. The days continue on, and people will continue to live their lives, with or without you. We're all doing what we can, and that's all we can do. Life is not fair. Whatever happens, happens. And sometimes, things manage to work out, if only for a bit. Hey there. If you made it to the end, thank you very much for watching. If this story sounds like something you'd be interested in, I hope you'll check it out for yourself. I realize that there's a variety of interpretations and personal meanings that can be pulled from this series. I know there will be a lot of things I missed or didn't quite nail down. That said, I wanted to put out a more personal interpretation, so hopefully it was enjoyable in that right. Take my little analysis with a grain of salt. Either way, hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Peace, guys.